السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. أما بعد. Welcome to another episode of Critical Conversations with Imam Mazhar. We speak to critical issues with experts. The mental health struggles among the Muslim community are undeniably real. Some dismiss them to be jinn possessions, others take them to be a sense of taboo. But the reality is that mental health issues do exist and they are real. Amidst Muslim scholarship, we struggle with cultism, mob mentality, and sectarianism at times. This also contributes to the stress, confusion, and questions surrounding faith for the masses across the board. Today's guest is an exceptional Muslim scholar from Thunder Bay, Ontario, and a registered psychotherapist. He is a great friend of mine and somebody who's assisted me at many levels. He continues to benefit communities, I would say, with his religious and social work and his expertise. May Allah bless him for what he does. I'd like to welcome my friend Shaykh Ibrahim Fayaz. Ahlan wa sahlan, Shaykh. Jazakallah khairan for your time.
Barakallah. Thanks for having me, Mazhar.
Barakallah feek. Shaykh, to begin with, how are you and your family dealing with this pandemic?
Alhamdulillah. We're okay. In a way, we've already adjusted to a Thunder Bay lifestyle. We've been here for a few years, and it's slow pace and it's small. We wanted that.
Amazing.
So, alhamdulillah, it's in a way, if you live in Thunder Bay, you already social distance. So we're used to that.
Yeah, amazing. I stopped by your place about 3 days ago on my way to BC, and Thunder Bay seems very calm compared to places like Toronto. And
Yeah.
I think you don't even have much coronavirus cases there, right?
Yeah, it's isolated in terms of it's a big town city. It has everything you need, but you're 8 hours away from Sault Ste. Marie, another big town. You're 7 or 8 hours away from Winnipeg, so it does that does give you a benefit of really against COVID-19 to narrow down the cases, the potential cases that occur. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So even amidst this COVID-19 pandemic, you're continuing to assist individuals on online platforms and whatnot. How's that going?
Yeah, well, in healthcare services and in private practice, people are going online now. They're using different platforms, telemental health, likewise, video. Yeah.
Sheikh, really, I want to know, describe the work that you do in Thunder Bay and other places and why it's really important to you and the balance that you find both at a spiritual level and the social level. How is that very important to you?
Well, I work in a mental health outpatient program in a healthcare setting, and I see people with various mental health issues, disorders. In my private practice, I work with indigenous clients.
Wow, amazing.
Who come from up north, from northwestern Ontario. There's all the reserves. There's many reserves, and I also see couples. I do couple work as well. And then, apart from my clinical work, I also volunteer as a Muslim as a chaplain or a spiritual care provider to the university students here, and as an associate type of imam in the masjid where there are many classes that take place there as well.
Yeah, amazing. Another beneficial aspect that I'm seeing with your presence in Thunder Bay is you're sort of connecting the Muslim community to mental health aspects as well, which are not found in, say, other communities like in Scarborough. Like, for example, when you set up programs at the Thunder Bay Mosque, a lot of them are psychotherapy orientated. Is that correct? Am I on par?
Well, in a way, our religion does talk about ethics, about healthy behaviors, about personal development, how we can mature, relationship, how we can have healthier relationships, and this is what interested me really in the social or in the psychology world, because that subject really does help a person. So one of the benefits when you
Of
asked
course.
why is it important to you, and describe my work, is it provides self-awareness, and I think a religious person also wants to be self-aware. You know the you're familiar with the the spiritual saying, "Man arafa nafsa faqad arafa rabbah," type of
Of course. Yes.
understanding. I think that whosoever recognizes themselves and their authentic and true self has recognized their creator. So and that's important too when we interpret religion, religious texts. I know we might get into this later, but how much of our psyche, our subconscious, plays into that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if we are an angry person, we're gonna see religion in an anger lens. Um, so the human comprehension, the human interpretation, and whatever happens subjectively, that has an influence on how we interpret religion and see religion, how we see God, how we see the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So
Allah.
that's why we do want to work on our mental well-being, on our own unfinished, what we call in our therapeutic world, the unfinished business,
Okay.
our own unmet needs or childhood wounds. We want to go through that own healing so that we can be healthy individuals, and we can bring that healthiness before God as well when we see when we communicate with God, or when we interpret the message of Allah.
I mean, two things that you mentioned I found really intriguing. One is the whole aspect of your dedication with Native communities. Coming from a background where I've served in Lac La Biche, Alberta, which is wholesomely populated by natives, we have definitely lacked in fulfilling their rights as our fellow neighbors and as individuals who live with us, really. And then the saying, "Man arafa nafsah faqad arafa rabbah." That, the way you describe it from your psychotherapy lens, that just opens a whole other kind of, I wouldn't say worms, but amazing stuff. Like, if a person is not stable, or if a person is going through struggles, that may act as a barrier or cause some sort of a defiance in understanding Allah. Is that what you're also alluding to, Sheikh?
Yeah, and when we speak of psychology, the psyche is in the origin. I think it's from the Latin. It actually means the knowledge of the soul. So initially, it was like a philosophy, and some might debate it's more science. There's groups amongst psychologists as well that argue it's more of a science. Others say no, it's more of a philosophy, but it's both actually, based on the trends or the schools of thought. Um, but yeah, self-awareness is key, whether it's in psychology or in religion. We want to
Mm-hmm.
become more self-aware. What are my behaviors? What are my unhealthy behaviors? Religion has come for islah, right? To
Of course.
reform people. The Prophet ﷺ came with teachings and revolutionary teachings in his time, to take people out of jahala, to take them out of ignorance into awareness. So
So,
this, yeah, and this is really wide, right? It could be in terms of aqidah, in terms of belief, in terms of worship, in terms of our connection with God, in terms of how we, what the rights of people are, right?
of course. So that ties into our conversation about mental health dismissed as jinn possession among the Muslim community, or something as a tabooed subject. Why is this? Why do Muslims not understand the ramifications of approaching mental health or psychotherapy? Why do they not understand the ramifications of approaching this matter and equating it to, say, jinn possession, which is highly debated even among Muslim scholarship?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. There are many reasons I see, and what comes to mind is there's a lack of awareness of what mental health means. I think the literature now around emotional intelligence, even within the medical field, people lack an understanding of what trauma does to people. So they might just view it from a medical lens and not from a mental health lens. So it's not just spiritual people, but in general, there's a lack of awareness of mental health issues and how it affects our brain, how it affects our body, our mind, our spirit as well. Um, but yes, ignorance. There's superstitions in the Muslim community a lot. Ignorance of mental health, lack of awareness. Um, it could also be real in a way. I can understand the similarities because there are certain mental health issues or disorders that might have similar um,
Like outcomes, sort
manifestations,
of.
or
Uh,
type of experiences, just like if a person is possessed by a jinn.
mhm.
But
um,
unfortunately, we
but
tend to
I might,
run too
sure,
quickly to this is a jinn, right? Too quickly, like whereas if someone has a headache or someone has
exactly.
diabetes
Yeah,
or someone has a heart attack, we're not going to say a jinn attacked that person,
wallahi,
right?
on point. Yeah,
So we do need to look at things from a broader lens, and from a spiritual lens, it respects the medical and the mental perspective as well.
yeah. Forgive me for saying this. If we don't dismiss mental health as jinn possession, it might affect the market of sort of the people who are into the jarfuk business. Do you think it would affect the people in the exorcism business?
I don't specifically know anyone in that business, but yes, there are people are. It's a human condition. I think we all have fears and
Man, you
insecurities.
you do know people, man. We had one while studying in our khair, man. I'll leave that alone. I'll get in trouble. Subhanallah. So, Sheikh, that takes me to my next question. How should we bring about awareness with regards to mental health among the Muslim community?
I think we need to bring like programs that promote awareness of it into the masjid, into the madrasa. We need
Oh
to
man, of course, yes.
as well um, build networks amongst Muslim institutes like Khalil Center or Nasiha Mental Health and the masjids, right? So
Of
they
course.
have, and I think they are doing that. It's good to build that awareness and to just really speak about it, because as long as you're putting something underneath the carpet, it's going to stay there. These are really taboo topics, sensitive. People might feel anxious about them, but you have to speak about them. You have to, as I say, you have to label it to tame it, type of thing, or you have to name it to tame it. You have to name it to tame it. So you have to name these issues and experiences people are having, and that will prepare us. You also have to have counseling and programs from the masjid. Subhanallah,
Hmm.
I've seen churches that do the AA program, Alcoholics Anonymous program.
Yeah,
They run it from the church basement, and they obviously intertwine it with their own
faith.
religion and faith. And it's already really spiritual already, so we don't have to do that much to it. But
So why are we lacking in that regard? Like for example, in the U.S. and once again, even in the U.S., there are different sectors or different segments of the community who are doing different things. In some masajid, they are doing an amazing job with things like mental health and free health clinics. What is the main barrier from bringing about these programs in masjid, say in Canada? Why is it the board, or are we still stuck in that backwards mentality of saying that well, let's opt for the witch hunt, let's opt for the jinn operation rather than facilitating psychotherapy or mental health? services in our mosque.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I know, like, I think masjids, they're also into the trend business. Like, whenever it becomes a trend, then everyone jumps
Of
on
course,
board.
yeah,
And this is where we have to really, like, we have to hold masjid managements and imams accountable, that they really, and educate them, that they really consider the needs of the Muslim, the
subhanallah.
spiritual needs, the biological, the psychological, yeah, the whole being, really, right?
Yeah,
What our needs are. We really need to understand that and recognize what we're missing in the masjid, and speak about that.
I think you hit the hammer on the nail. People only begin to appreciate matters once they start becoming a trend. Like, in honesty, let's speak with transparency. About 10 years ago, or I would say 15 years ago, in some of the mosques now, say in Toronto or other places in Canada, which are holding interfaith sessions or interfaith programs, doing such would have been considered kufr or zandaqa,
Mhm.
apostasy at times, just 15 years ago. Like I mentioned the example of one of our scholars who used to do interfaith back in the days, and he was sort of mocked for it. So I really think this is a very harmful attitude to walk around with, and that takes me to my next point, Sheikh. How do we tie mental health issues with, toxic mob mentality and irrational cultism?
Yeah, before I get into that, I would just like to add that
For sure,
I
for sure.
think the masjid system, if we look at it like a business, like from a capitalistic lens, you're only gonna uh, invest money in those type of programs where there's views, and
Ah,
we shouldn't be running after views or after votes, or just that attention of people. We need to we worship and we follow the truth. So whatever is the truth, we want to follow that. We don't want to follow people, right? Something to
okay.
the effect that, um, لا يعرف الحق بالرجال ولكن يعرف الحق بالحق, type of thing,
Yes.
or ولكن يعرف الرجال بالحق.
Rijalu bil haqq.
Yeah,
Yeah, Ali radiallahu anh said something similar.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
so how do we tie that in?
yeah, so I think, like, I would explain the characteristics of a cult mentality and how they function. Um, First of all, a cult mentality includes picking the right people, and research shows that the people who are the most susceptible to recruitment are stressed, emotionally vulnerable. They have uh, relationship conflicts or no family connections, or are living in adverse socioeconomic conditions. So you see this
Wow.
usually, like, people are brainwashed. Those that are vulnerable could be brainwashed, and these can be healthy people as well. They could be, but just because of certain circumstances, stressed out or fed up with life. That's one characteristic of a cult psychologically, picking the
So
right people.
how does this affect scholars then? How do scholars get involved in such?
What do you mean by that? Can you clarify that?
You said people who are sort of socially deprived are vulnerable to becoming, say, victims of mob mentality.
Yeah, it's
How does
interesting
this
you
relate to
mentioned this because,
scholars unleashing mob mentality?
yeah, well, I think sometimes unhealthy understandings of religion and God could lead to this type of mentality as well.
Okay.
And this is what famous psychologists who, like Freud, really founding fathers, even though I don't agree with whatever, and there's a lot of things that other his students didn't agree with him, what he said, but whenever he did critique religion, he critiqued it based on this, that there is this, even though he never used this language, a more nuanced and balanced language, he went really too far in his critique of religion. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, that aspect of religion that could make a person become blind to their own realities, to others' rights, that is looked down upon, and he's called that out in a way, and that
Yeah.
really promotes rigidity, and rigidity is really one aspect of cult mentality. So one characteristic of a cult mentality is picking the right people, that is vulnerable people. There's also this type of characteristics of what we call love bombing. So there's a lot of flattery, affection, validation in the beginning. Then there's isolation. So sometimes cults isolate. So you might see these in religious groups. They might isolate you from the reality outside. They might just say, oh, this is my institution. You have to follow this way. You can't follow other institutions. And then they feed you their ideas or their teachings. And the fourth is keeping control. So they tend to um, go back and forth with terror and love. So, like telling you things like, you can't go out there because we've isolated you. These are the teachings we've taught you. And also between love. So those vulnerable people then get caught up into that type of system. So it's interesting. These are some manifestations and characteristics of it, but you can find these sometimes within religious groups, unfortunately.
Yes.
And even though they might be promoting something good and religious, but the way they're doing it resonates with cultish behavior.
Yeah. That sort of reminds me of, say, the Imams of the. Can you hear me, Sheikh?
Yeah.
That reminds me of the Imams of the past, like the Hanafi, the Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, Malik, Ahmad, and others. Um, you would see that at some levels there was a sense of appreciation among them. But it's the followers at times who took these specific madhahib and turned them into cults. And there is historic narrations about, not going to mention the madhab that might offend some people, but people of that madhab were going to individuals and actually bashing their bottles of nabidh, which was allowed in their madhab, in the other madhab.
Oh, you gave it away, brother.
Oh man. So astaghfirullah. So at times there is love, harmony, compassion in the origins, but when matters become institutionalized, at times things just fall apart. So, Sheikh, how should then Muslims learn to love Islam in the face of irrational cultism among their leaders? This, at times, I've seen personally working as an imam, somebody who's there in the social realms of society. I've seen people leaving Islam because of the bickering among their leaders. So, what is your message to such people? I know.
I think
Yes, go ahead.
sticking to the basics of our religion, right? Going back to the basic truths,
Yeah,
and not really making those opinions, which are all in the area of dhanniyat or speculative knowledge, like it's the absolute truth type of thing. And this is how Imams approached ikhtilaf as well, right?
yeah,
They
of
the
course.
mujtahids they knew that I could be wrong or I could be right, type of thing. So really coming back to the basics of your deen, whether it's we worship Allah and we follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Our connection is to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the Book of Allah. That's absolute. When it comes to fiqhi masail and ikhtilafat, yes, follow that which you trust the most and what your taqwa promotes. But worshiping individuals, I think this is really that takes people away from the basics of the faith. And this is why the verse of the you know to the Jews that is mentioned in the Quran, that they made their rabbis into like lords besides God,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's really important. We cannot make this same mistake. And even if we do follow a sheikh, a mentor, a spiritual guide, we need to assess them and evaluate if they follow the basics of the faith and they
Yeah,
promote that. They're not promoting all that extra stuff at a level which is like the basic truths, right? The
yeah.
basics of deen, the essentials.
I actually got a message from an accomplished qari saying I almost left Islam because of a mistake that my sheikh made. So this
Yeah.
is not only affecting the average Muslim, it's actually affecting individuals who are engrossed into the teachings of religion and who are accomplished when it comes to faith matters.
Yeah.
What does this have to do with their psychology? Like when they, of course, everyone in essence would follow the Quran and the accepted Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but how do we not become victim to taking somebody as our ultimate authority subconsciously, if I may say?
Uh, you have to make your subconscious more conscious, so you have to become more self-aware of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you become more aware of yourself, you know your vulnerabilities and where people might be able to, people of power, like Imams, um, or other any other organizations or institutes, how they can exploit you, right? Using religion or faith or God. So
Mm-hmm.
you really have to be, and that's why I mentioned the first characteristic of a cult is to pick the most vulnerable, to pick the right people, those people who are really stressed with life. And as an imam, when I was formerly an imam, um, I saw this regularly. Those people who were really worried, they were going through some grief and loss, they had some major accident or something happened in their life. They came to the masjid, like
Yeah,
seeking some type of comfort, some type of forgiveness, some type of blessings from God, seeking some type of change in their life, and if at that instance they meet up with the wrong person and they're not aware of what's going on within me, I'm going through this issue. Um, right now is not the time to be exploited by this person. Um, so that, and then sometimes it's not so it's not so present. It's our childhood wounds, our unmet needs that we seek from religious leaders.
mm-hmm.
uh, and this is where spiritual abuse occurs, right? Spiritual abuse is a huge term, and we can also say cultism in a way. It could be like spiritual abuse when religious leaders use that type of approach. um, yeah, so really becoming aware of who you are and what your connection to God and his messenger is.
Yeah,
Studying the religion yourself too is really important, so that you do not become exploited um, uh, through different ideas or circles within the religion so easily.
yeah.
Yeah.
Branching off the topic of studying religion yourself, I remember back in the days people used to say, don't read the translation of the Quran, rather resort to the scholars. Now that I think about it, this was, in my understanding, just a ploy to sort of keep authority and
Mm.
not really let people analyze the Quran themselves and connect with the Quran personally. I don't know what's your thoughts on that. Maybe I'm being overzealous.
Well, it depends what the context that was said in. If it was said to a person who might have just relied on the translation and not study Arabic, that might be a correct statement to make. That
Of
don't
course,
put all your trust
I
in the
would agree
translation.
with
But
resorting to scholars
in
in
general,
that regard.
I think we all, even if we study Arabic, whenever someone reads the Quran, there is a sense of interpretation going on as well. So
Yeah,
and we can't cut the basic Muslim away from their deen. Like they it's okay to have self study, an approach to self study, which is also maybe directed and mentored. If you feel confused and you don't understand anything, you should
yeah,
ask
of
someone.
course. Yes.
But you can't completely close the door from people um, as they want to learn and seek and understand the Quran or the Hadith.
hmm Like it's mind-boggling at times. Of course, my statement was in the context where people just want to read through their tilawa, say understand what they're reciting,
Yeah.
whilst resorting to the scholars for more intricate aspects. And the reason why I mentioned this is because I have like amazingly accomplished doctors and engineers in my community, and they've said we've never opened the translation of the Holy Quran just because it was told to us that don't read the translation, you'll become misguided. not because we wanted to cut ties with scholars. So I find that really amazing. The man has performed the most intricate surgeries, but he hasn't been able to open the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a personal reflection. You know, in that regard, I'm not talking about the tilawah, rather understanding that tilawah. Yeah, but at the end of the day, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and I feel there is insecurity and fear if it's just done generally, and that statement is made just to close um, the doors to understanding the Quran. It's unfair, right? You have to allow people to experience their spirituality, understand their spirituality themselves. It's
Yes.
actually a healthy component for people to experience it themselves, because even in the scientific literature, when it comes to understanding religion and experiencing it, that itself could be way far beyond any philosophical argument to believe in the creator, right?
Yeah.
One of the arguments of religion and God is personal experience. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
allow people to have a personal experience as well of their scripture, of their text, of their ibadah, and also guide them gently, friendly, in a friendly manner with compassion. You don't have to brainwash them, or they don't have to think just like you, because everyone's mind is different, right?
Yeah.
And the essentials of Islam are already so simple. It's beautiful. It's the fitrah, and it's the La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. That's the basics and essentials of Islam. There's nothing big about that or really intricate, or that people will get misguided about that, right?
Yes, of course. Sheikh, after we studied and after we qualified as Muslim scholars, at least on paper for many of us, some of us actually, mashallah, like yourself, I've seen you working very hard throughout your studies, your primary studies, thereafter your secondary studies, and even your masters at an Islamic level. Allah bless you for that. But you see now a wave of young scholars just coming into the picture. Like, say, in Ontario, I'm not talking about the isolated communities. How can these young scholars navigate their way to benefit their communities among, say, toxic communities or toxic environments?
Tough question, and really good question. Um, I think scholars and graduates need to be self-sufficient. I think that's a basic teaching of our religion to everyone, not just scholars, and that is, do not beg, or do not be in a position where metaphorically you might be begging, or there might be strings attached where um, people may exploit you in that manner or exploit your knowledge. So to be self-sufficient is really important, so that, and all the great imams in a way that we've studied, whether it's Imam al-Quduri or all these other
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
nicknames they have, they had their own businesses, and because of that, they weren't any strings attached when it comes to serving the deen, and serving people in regards to their deen.
I personally think that there's a lot of fear. There's a whole fear component here when you're working, say, under a masjid committee who wants you to only say specific things and to basically be a parrot for their narrative.
For sure, yeah, you'll have some people in the management like that. Not everyone, and we don't want to generalize as well, but some
Sure,
people for
sure.
sure they'll, it's like a dictator running the masjid type of thing, and that's
Yep.
not healthy for an imam who wants to represent Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a complex and
Yeah.
in a diverse manner for different people that are trying to come to the masjid.
Yeah, I know you had some experiences in that regard, and Allah reward your sabr. But to follow up on that point, I wanted to ask, since you have experience in both the spiritual realm and the mental health realm, how can psychotherapists or mental health practitioners be more accommodating to, say, Muslim scholars who themselves are going through mental health issues and their communities are also going through mental health issues?
That's a good question as well. I think sometimes when we look at a religious leader, like just thinking back before I became an imam myself, looking back at a famous imam, like how I viewed them, like they were perfect or they were in a way beyond human.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think that's not true. That we are humans just like anyone else. We have our own issues. We have our maybe our relationship issues. We have our
Yeah.
challenges with our kids. We have our the challenges about daily provision and sustaining ourselves and our families. We have the anxieties and stresses of everyone else, and I think we need to acknowledge that we're not perfect.
Of
We
course.
don't have all the answers as well, and that's a part of the human condition. So that's the first thing I think we need to recognize, that as imams, we are human beings like everyone else, and we have human problems. I think the other thing is, as imams, we also have to understand that when it comes to psychotherapy, it's not some, yes, it could be a different field, but if you actually study it, it's and all these other fields that we and subjects that are not quote unquote religious, we might view them as such. They are in essence serving the body and the mind, and that's all interconnected from our spiritual lens as well, right? We're taught in the hadith, وَعَلَى جَسَدِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا, your body has a right over you. So there's a spiritual obligation when it comes to body rights, when it comes to mental rights. That's not excluded. There's no dichotomy between
Mm-hmm.
the hereafter, or sorry, the spiritual and the material. They're interconnected.
Wow.
We have to understand that. Sometimes we lecture in such a way that we create a dichotomy between the spiritual and the material, and they're both interconnected. Because our body is, and that's why eating halal is so important, because it
Yeah.
influences our spiritual behaviors and our connection with Allah. And even that the food is material, right? That's just one example. The other thing is, I think we need to promote education on the human psyche as we deal with people. As
Mm-hmm.
imams, I think we lack the basic skills of listening to people, showing empathy and comfort, basic counseling skills. That's really important, because and starting from our institutions, because I studied at the University of Toronto. There was the program that I studied at was, there was ministers, there was rabbis, there was people from the Buddhist faith, or
Mm-hmm.
spiritual tradition, religious leaders from all faiths, and their program, if you looked at their syllabus, was really interesting. They tapped into the religious person's intentions, like what's bringing you to become a minister, what is your intentions behind it,
Wow. Amazing.
what are your subconscious or unconscious drives and motives to serving people and wanting to connect them to God. And it
Mm-hmm.
brings out a lot of your own personal uh, baggage, if you want to put it that way,
Yeah.
and it allows you to really think about your own self, like why am I doing this, and reform your intentions in a way, so that we do not harm people when we're doing the work of God, as we would say, or
Yeah.
when we're doing khidmah.
Amazing
So
how they approach this as um, contradictory to the many ways as we're taught, like in an average madrasa. Chalo, paro kya imam suyuti kya get into the books. Subhanallah. But ours, amazing. Our teachers, a lot of them do approach studies in this manner as well. Like we saw some of these similar sentiments being echoed by, say, Mufti Rada al Haq or Sheikh Suleiman Choksi. They would actually get to your mind. You know what I'm saying? They would actually make you understand what your purpose is of studying knowledge and benefiting the masses.
yeah,
Uh, so, so in that regard, I know we have some mental health institutions in GTA, in the GTA. We have Quba, which is run by one of my, amazing friends and mentors, Mufti Abdul Hayy Patel. We have the Khalil Center.
he's my
Uh,
colleague, by the way, in university.
Abdul Hayy,
Yeah.
mashallah. How can they sort of accommodate scholars who are going through mental health issues, either due to suffering with the pressures of committees, or either because they were discriminated against based on certain rulings that they say talk about. How can these institutions more accommodate these scholars?
Yeah, it's a tough question, and it has to do a lot with um, breaking down barriers to services. Just because you might think that I'm an imam and I got it all right in life. I know it all. I live it all, and I have no issues. And that's not true, like I said. So we have to talk about that openly. That
Yeah,
imams are humans, and we have human problems as well. I think also holding managements to account. Like there's a lot of emotional abuse taking place.
of course.
There's not a lot of rights when it comes to I think the imam union is needed, where we have delayed in that regards.
Yes.
Something that fights for employee rights and imams' rights when it comes to working, and how they're treated. But yeah, I think imams should be given like some type of leeway and some type of promotion. If you're a religious scholar, you get 50% off counseling services from
Mm-hmm.
these institutes like Nasiha Mental Health or others. They should
Nasiha is also there, yes.
Khalil centers there and others.
Mm-hmm. But even when imams sort of opt for creating a union which would protect their rights, which would protect their jobs, which would protect their mental health, oftentimes they stray into a direction wherein they say, okay, Deobandis only for our sort of, association.
Hmm.
And to me, this is really problematic. Even when we're, say, establishing a general body which looks after the basic rights of imams, we sort of fall into that aspect, that trap very quickly of saying, okay, Deobandis only, or Salafis only, or Ahlul Hadith only. And that's why I go back to fiqh institutions like Amja, who are amazing. They say that we encompass everyone and anyone at a fiqh level, but something like that has not been done. Uh, at a level of where associations or institutions protect the rights of the people under them, or the rights of their subscribers, to so to speak.
Hmm.
So, Sheikh, I'm going to get a little personal here. You don't have to answer if you wish, but uh, tying this whole conversation down to your experiences with sectarianism and how
Hmm.
you tackle it.
Well, I think it's important not to be politically correct. You need to know your own aqidah and your boundaries. But when it comes to social work and your wider purposes in the community, you need to work with people from different backgrounds, even different religions, even
Mm-hmm.
different sects that you might think that are not Muslim, um, because for the wider community good. So you need to know your motives, you need to know your boundaries, your religious boundaries, and be assertive about that. Don't be shy. You don't have to be politically correct. But I think also when it comes to sectarianism, we like I mentioned before, we when we make those things that are speculative into like absolute truths, like they're
Mm-hmm.
qat'iyat,
Okay. Yes.
we have this, then we create a lot of sects.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas if we stick to the basics of our deen, the basics, the kalima, our five pillars of our religion. Um, you know, the main message of the Quran is really tawheed, monotheism, prophethood, and believing in the Prophet ﷺ as a prophet of God, and believing in the hereafter. And whenever you get into the details of those, there's always going to be speculative differences, like in the details of God
Mm-hmm.
or his beautiful attributes, in the details of the prophethood and what the characteristics are like, in the details of the hereafter, like what the different stages in the hereafter are. But if we go back to the basics, um, we can connect and really um, transcend sectarianistic type of attitudes.
Yeah, I think you put a very discreet but powerful message out there to the scholars. I'll sort of wrap this interview up with one final question, and followed by your beneficial advices to all. What do you see as the greatest factor in reference to mental health among Muslims? Where do they suffer most in this regard?
Well, that's a tough question, and I question the question because it's like
Sure.
um,
So
I
it's not
think
a specific
Muslims
issue.
I think Muslims are just like any other human beings, and we have all the same issues as everyone else does. There might be different factors, like some cultural factors might be different. Like if you're coming from a certain Arab culture or certain South Asian Desi culture, there
Yeah.
might be different differences in collectivist cultures or more shame-based cultures where they shame
Ah,
people.
understood.
But other than that, the factors of mental health issues are biological in nature. They have to do with the human brain and certain neurons, um, chemical imbalance, you can say. They have to do with our psychological well-being. They have to do with our social well-being. So how we're connected, how healthy our relationships are. Um, these are some of the factors um, that come to mind. That is really broad. It will look different to every in every culture, or um, yeah. I think that it's a
Of
tough
course,
question.
that makes sense, 100%. So just
Yeah,
like everyone else suffers from various causes, Muslims too are not just limited to a certain cause, they suffer from many causes. Is that what you're saying?
yeah.
Yeah. Um, any additional advices and thoughts that you wish to render, Sheikh?
A lot has been said. I just want to say Jazakallah to you and your viewers for having me on in this quarantine time, and
Mhm.
makes my time more valuable. So hopefully you can just end off with that. Let's try to make this Ramadan valuable and make use of our time, inshallah.
Barakallah feek. How can people reach you if they wish to contact you?
You can reach me by my email. You can type it down somewhere,
Okay.
ibrahim.fayaz79@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook, but I don't use Facebook like I don't know why a lot of Muslims and even outside the Muslim community, we're using social media like it's like our microphone on the stage type of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't like using it like that. I just like using it like I'm just a human
Mhm.
being. Maybe I might post a personal picture or where I'm at.
Yeah,
It's
that's
social media. Like we don't have to take it so seriously. Like I'm the
yeah,
president of the United States. I have to make a statement. And I think that culture is really
yeah.
it has its cons,
That's an
right?
advice to me as well to just chill out, calm down with social media. Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh, for your time. May Allah bless you. May Allah bless your family. May Allah bless all that you're doing. And inshallah, we look forward to connecting with you soon once this whole quarantine aspect dies down. Do visit us in BC as well. Inshallah, it will be a blessing to host you. And we look forward to having you on the podcast in the future as well. And any such devices or any such expertise you wish to render from my platform, although it's not very great, you're more than welcome at any time. Barakallah fiqh, Sheikh. Jazakallah
Barakallah.
khairan.
Take care, man.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam.